There we go. Okay. So the stories we read for today were Drowned by Junot Diaz and Sexy by Jhumpa Lahiri. And the one point I want to make about them is that they are both from the very end of the 20th century. They're both from the late 90s. And they are examples of this. This is the last term I'm going to give you in the whole course. They're examples of psychological realism. And psychological realism is kind of the great granddaughter, if you like, of realism, which I don't know if you guys remember. We talked about realism a long time ago, remember? We talked about realism and naturalism. Well, hey Kia.
Hello.
Talking about the two stories we read for today, and I'm using the term psychological realism to describe those stories. So what psychological realism does is it tries to depict the world as it really is. Remember that phrase from way back. But it concentrates, instead of on the surfaces of things and the environment, it concentrates on the interior of the character, the consciousness of the character, and it tries to show the character undergoing a psychological change, a change of personality, or of knowledge, or of some kind of spirituality. And by that I don't mean religion. And it tries to accomplish this by taking the character through some situation in which something is illuminated or made clear to them, or they suddenly have some new glimmer of understanding, right? It's Paul on the road to Damascus sort of thing, except instead of a bright, blinding light, it's a very, very tiny little flashlight that, in a short story, the character has this glimmer of illumination about something that maybe they didn't understand before. So it's interesting because psychological realism kind of skips over postmodernism in a way. I mean, it uses a little bit of postmodernism in that sometimes it's irreverent and sometimes it refers to itself, but it really is just like this big jump from realism as it was written in the beginning of the century, really, and it just kind of leaps to the end of the 20th century, and it is still the dominant mode of short fiction in English, meaning in the United States and in Britain and in other English-speaking and English-writing countries. Although I would say that now, by 2020, we are starting to see more magical realism share the stage. For example, Kelly Link's book, Magic for Beginners, was this amazing collection of magical realist stories that were taken seriously by the literati, the literary elite. And so psychological realism is not the 100% dominant mode anymore, but it's still, like, if you pick up a literary journal today, where you're reading stories that are being published right now, I don't know, 6.5 out of 10 are going to be psychological realism. And so one of the things that happens in psychological realism is that sometimes the main character just becomes kind of this canvas on which the story is painted. So, one of the things that struck me about Sexy from Jhumpa Lahiri is that Miranda, her motivations are pretty subdued. It's I have an idea of what she wants, right? Which is, initially, at least, she wants, God, I've already forgotten the character's name, Rev, her boyfriend, to love her. But I don't think she wants him to marry her. I don't think she really wants him. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to read the story yet.
I read it.
You have, you?
Yeah.
Do you think that she really wants Rev to divorce his wife and move in with her and change her life? And
it didn't really seem that way to me, but maybe it's just the way that I was reading it.
No, I read it that way too. I think she just wants the attention, the desire to be wanted, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe the excitement of a
Mhm.
romantic fling.
Yeah.
I think she kind of liked the idea of having intimacy without the attachments. That obviously, because she is like a mistress, she liked the whole idea of like, oh, it's like a secret, like kind of taboo.
Yeah, yeah, you know,
Mhm.
and in fact, I think the story like hints that at the end when she's with the boy, and she gets him to tell her what he thinks the definition of sexy is, and he
Mhm.
says it's when you love somebody you don't know, right? Which I think is what she was going for. The line that really struck me, and by the way, this is how you know you're reading psychological realism, is that the markers of change are very vivid and clear. So the first line I underlined in sexy was funny because one of you said the word mistress in this line. Oh, come on now, where is it? Here we go. This is where you know the character has changed, right? Miranda, she would not have thought in this way in the first page or two. It says, this is on 1197, but you don't have to look at it. While Dev was at the airport, Miranda went to Feline's basement to buy herself things she thought a mistress should have. Right? So she's not thinking badly of herself. She's not feeling sorry for herself. She's kind of playing a role, isn't she? And she's buying the costume for it now, in a way. So that's one way that Lahiri maintains the agency of this character and allows her to still be sort of in control of the story, even though what she quote unquote wants isn't as sort of vivid or over the top or obvious as it is in other kinds of fiction where characters' motivations are more sort of distilled into a particular object or a particular thing. So psychological realism does kind of stick to the old principles of realism, which means depicting the world as it really is. But instead of depicting an exterior world, psychological realism thinks it's depicting consciousness as it really is, and the experience of going through something new as it really is, and having a flash of illumination and a sudden realization as it really is, right? Which all of these things are debatable, and we could talk all day about whether or not this is an accurate representation of the human experience, but it was definitely something that fiction writers at the end of the 20th century were really interested in doing. This is right before I went to graduate school, and so I read a ton of this stuff. My writing is really almost bound to it, like I can barely escape it because of how much psychological realism I had fed to me when I was a grad student. I read a lot of Jhumpa Lahiri. I read a lot of Junot Diaz. I read a lot of Raymond Carver. The Interpreter of Maladies was her book that came out, and one of the things about The Interpreter of Maladies that was so powerful was her ability to not just to do psychological realism, because honestly that's not that hard. What she could do well was show this divided consciousness when people kind of had one foot in one culture and another foot in another culture, right? So her ability to depict not really the immigrant experience so much as the post-immigrant experience, right? So the first generation and the second generation of immigrant kids in the United States, she really had a handle on how they still felt divided in a way that was hard for them to define or reconcile, and that's where she made her bones, as the saying goes, is that she could really nail that experience. And Junot Diaz also, with the Puerto Rican culture in New York City, or in New Jersey rather, he was able to demonstrate how in Drown you see that the main character, the protagonist, he's caught between several worlds, right? He's caught between his mother's world of sort of hiding in the apartment and being very quiet and not venturing out. And she, at one point she says, this place just isn't safe. And then when he was younger, you know, his friend with Beto, he even tried a few same-sex experiences, and my sense is, now I've read Drown many times, my sense is that he's very envious of Beto's willingness to venture out, right? To go to college, to go do these other things, and he's just not able to do that. In fact, he goes back to the swimming pool early in the story where they had spent so much time as children, right? He wasn't even willing to go that far. And in fact, he sort of claimed he was looking for Beto there, if I remember. But when I read the story now, I realize that this is one of the things that psychological realism does too, is when you read it a second and a third time, you pick up a lot of stuff you didn't pick up before. This character never expects to run into Beto at that swimming pool. Never. Like, he says he thinks he might be there, but he knows damn well Beto's not going to be at the swimming pool. That's the last place that Beto's going to be, is some old hangout that they had when they were kids, right? So questions or observations about that before I go on?
I didn't see the story Drown posted in the syllabus.
I added it kind of at the end.
Oh,
It was
okay.
there, and then I took it out, and then I put it back in, but there's no assignments tied to it. So if you didn't read Drown, it's not gonna hurt you. I was really struggling with how much work to give you guys here at the end, to be honest. All right, I'm trying to get us all to the finish line safely. And I figure you've got a lot of papers that are all coming due simultaneously, and just a lot of stuff with different due dates and different ways of entering it. And I was trying to streamline things a little bit. And I thought, okay, if I'm not going to tie an assignment to the story, do I really need them to read the story? And then the other side of me is like, but it's a week's worth of school. They don't need to just read one short story. So that's my fault. But you should read it anyway, Kia, because it's good.
Okay. I'm interested in reading it, honestly.
And you're a fiction writer. And if you're a fiction writer in 2020 in America, you really can't ignore Junot Diaz.
All right.
He's pretty important. So, yeah, I mean, you know, it's, his work has an electricity to it and a kind of a fireworks that's under the surface that is really powerful and worth investigating. But so the last thing I'll say before I want to talk about the next topic, which is the final exam, immigrant experiences and the experience of attempting to become American and to assimilate or not to assimilate, and the tensions and the struggles and the conflicts that creates, that has been going on as long as there has been American literature. Like, that has been, and the reason is because that is one of the primary stories of America, right? If America has, I don't know, the top two stories of America, I would say, are race and the struggle for America to try to live up to its own stated ideals about equality, right? Which is a struggle that has not ended. And then the other story would be the attempt by people who from all over the world who come to this country to participate in whatever it is that this is, right? And the conflicts that has created for those people, for their children, for the people who were quote unquote already here, and for the people who were truly already here, which are the Native American peoples, right? To whom we are all immigrants from other weird places. But those two narratives come up over and over and over and over again in American literature, because those are the stories that we are using to try to work through our problems as a society and as a culture, right? And every immigrant group has had a very different experience with coming to America. And Lahiri writes from the perspective of these characters. Now, in this case, it's the main character is actually an American, a white woman who meets Indian characters. Her other stories are about Indian characters. Her most famous story, called The Interpreter of Maladies, is actually about a young American couple who are in India and who are interacting with a driver who's taking them on a tour, which is kind of interesting because they're not really immigrants, but they're experiencing another culture. And so they're kind of negotiating what's going on with this other culture. But so Lahiri is writing from the perspective of characters who are often second or third generation, which means that they feel like they should be assimilated, but they're not, right? They should feel completely American, but they don't. And that idea that you should feel completely American is something that the culture, the society sort of feeds you this concept, and it creates pressure and tension and stress and anxiety, because it's like, oh, am I supposed to be American now? And an example from my own life is that my grandparents were from Italy, and most of their kids were born in Italy, but some of their kids were born in the United States. And when they got here and settled down and had a house and a dinner table, they tried to enforce this rule where nobody at the dinner table could speak anything but English. No Italian allowed. And the idea was, if you speak English and you speak English well, you'll have more opportunities and Americans won't hate you and maybe you'll get a decent job and so on. And it was all this idea that there was this negotiation underway with the culture, right? And the negotiation was look American, act American, sound American, you'll be treated American, right? And so they were trying to participate in that what they thought was that bargain. And of course, as we all know, these things don't turn out the way they're kind of always promised, but literature feeds off of that. Literature wants to tell those stories, right? And do the work of processing what it's like for people as they integrate and as they assimilate, or as they refuse to assimilate, right? As they decide to maintain aspects of their own culture, and maintain their identities, and to see themselves as more than just a newly remade individual. So psychological realism turns out to be a good tool for that, whereas postmodern stuff isn't maybe so much useful for that project, because psychological realism wants to take you through the psychology of transformation, right? That's what Joyce was doing, and this is not American literature, but in The Dead, James Joyce was taking us through the psychological effect of discovering what it feels like when you realize that your wife, who you thought was deeply and madly in love with you, is actually probably not so deeply and madly in love with you, but she had this lover when she was young who she is still in love with. What does that feel like, right? So contemporary writers have just taken the tools of psychological realism and said, okay, these are the best tools for the job of depicting this experience. And that's what a lot of them have used to greater or lesser effect. So one of the things to remember about all these movements, realism, naturalism, modernism, postmodernism, psychological realism, is that once a new one comes along, it doesn't cancel everything that came before it, right? Every new movement is a new movement, but it also takes a little bit from these other movements, and then they all kind of exist at the same time. So that right now, you can go to a bookstore. Well, you can't go to a bookstore right now, probably, can you? But maybe someday you'll be able to go to a bookstore again, I hope. Any book you pick off the shelf, you might say, well, this is really just kind of modernism. And you put it back and you pick another one as this is definitely postmodernism. And then you pull another one off and it's like, this is psychological realism. So like, what have I got in front of me right now? I've got Susan Choi's Trust Exercise. And I would say this is mostly psychological realism, but there's a lot of play in the language and a lot of fragmentation in the narrative. So there's a little bit of postmodernism going on, right? And that's wonderful because it's a big mess. And that's what literature should be. It should be a big mess. It shouldn't be this orderly, organized march of one movement and then another movement and so on and so forth. That's not how art works. The way that these movements even get names is that art keeps marching along, and then the professors come in behind it about 20 years later, and they start naming things after the fact. But the artists don't care, and they don't pay any attention to that, and they're certainly not trying to be one style of artist. Okay. What else about those things? Well, let me talk very briefly about the final. So I'm gonna pull up the modules on my iPad here so that I'm not messing with my laptop while we're talking. Okay, so I haven't written the final yet. That's the first thing to tell you. And I've been really struggling with what it's going to be like. Okay, so we took the midterm before spring break, right?
Yeah, that was the last time we met.
Right. And then the first thing we did after the plague was August Wilson's Fences, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I think the format of the final is going to be like a quiz. I don't think I'm going to make you do a lot of writing. I think it's going to be a multiple choice, questions that have multiple choice answers, just like the quizzes have been. Right. But instead of like 10, I guess because it's a final and exam and it's got to seem more scary, I'll probably give you 30 questions. Right. Which will probably not take you hardly any more time at all. Now, what kinds of questions? Well, let's say we're going to cover Fences by August Wilson for sure. And then I'll have a little bit in there about Good Country People and Defender of the Faith. Remember those two stories. Gwendolyn Brooks's We Real Cool and James Baldwin's Sonny's Blues. Then Sherman Alexie's This Is What It Means to Say Phoenix, Arizona. Oops, I lost my modules. Hold on. Where are we? Hold on. I hate the mobile app for Canvas. I think it's terrible. Then I'm definitely going to have a couple of questions about Mouse by Spiegelman. And then one or two about the Jhumpa Lahiri that we just talked about. So of those questions, I would guess, I don't know, half of them will be the kind of typical plot-related questions like, what sport did Troy want to go play in Fences? But then some of the questions are going to be about, things like the style of story, or like what is psychological realism? Is Baldwin an example of postmodernism or civil rights literature? I might ask a question about the Native American Voices module and what kind of tone is present in the Sherman Alexie story. I might give you a list of maybe characteristics of postmodernism, and maybe one of the things on the potential answers will not be a characteristic of postmodernism, right? So you'll pick which is not a characteristic of postmodernism, that sort of thing. And then I might say something like the Jhumpa Lahiri story is an example of what late 20th century kind of fiction, which I just finished talking about 90 seconds ago. Right, so those kinds of questions that will be hopefully easy. I'm not interested in giving you a hard final at all. I do have to give you some kind of final. And I think you want to have some kind of final because it's a chance to juice your grade a little bit. So questions about that? So I'll do 30 questions or 25 if I can't come up with 30. And I don't know, I'll give you an hour to do it. Does that seem like enough time?
Yeah, for me.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Lee.
I was just saying, I think that's just a perfect amount of time. I was scared you were going to say like, oh, I'm giving you 30 minutes to do 30 questions.
Yeah, an hour is pretty reasonable for 30 questions.
Yeah, I think that's like reasonable. Like 2 minutes per question. I think that's
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
fine.
I could do more. We could do 75 minutes if you wanted to make absolutely sure there was.
No, it's okay. Yeah,
You're
no, that sounds
being
fine.
very generous with 30 questions in an hour.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing will probably take you 20 minutes.
Yeah.
especially if you've read the stories, then you know most of them, and then the ones with like psychological realism or anything about the tone and stuff, that's just your thoughts, and you kind of have to figure that out yourself. You
Yeah,
get
no, some of it's going to be you'll have to apply what you've learned, and it won't be information that we've covered explicitly, but it will be your own ability to apply some of the terminology and some of the concepts. But I will make them as easy as I can.
I also wanted to know where some of your recorded Zoom, I guess, like meetings were, because I only found one of them and I was able to watch one of them, but I couldn't find the other ones.
Let me do a share screen real quick.
Um,
Hold on, just so you'll be able to see my screen once I get it.
oh, okay.
Give me just a second. And hold on, let me bring up Chrome.
I'm just really bad at using Canvas, so it's
Okay.
been a struggle for me.
Okay, let me share my screen. And can you see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, so is this the right class? Yeah. So let's go into the modules. Do you remember which one you found? I'll try to go to a module that's different than the one you
That
were.
the one I found was actually in your email. So
Yeah, no, if you go to the modules and then go to overview and materials, I think that I stuck them in here. Actually, yeah. Here's my own micro lecture on postmodernism.
okay.
Another place that you can go look is under announcements. I have recorded. I posted the recording from the 23rd. I reposted the recording from the 16th. Here's the recorded one from the 9th.
I saw the one about the postmodernism. I watched that one, but see the one about Slaughterhouse 5, like that one I haven't watched, I don't think.
Those are both the postmodernism.
Okay.
We read Mouse and Slaughterhouse 5 for the postmodernist module, and I talked about both of those on this recording that should be right there.
Okay.
But all of the recordings, I guess the easiest place to find them is here under the announcements page.
Yeah, or in the emails if you still have them from when you sent them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one that I posted was right. Where was it? Today's optional Q&A about fences and other topics. Yeah, the first one I posted was on March 26th, and there it is.
Okay.
So if you just click that, it brings up now I have no idea what this is going to look like for you guys. I hope it doesn't blow up our connection. Yeah, there's me. Giving a really weird look. So let's stop that. Embarrassing.
Okay. Yeah, that's all I really wanted to know. Only because I think my Canvas has been glitching on me, so I haven't got any of the announcements, notification, or anything. I didn't know that it was.
Oh no.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'll just go ahead and look through those, and I'll just watch those then.
Yeah, I mean, they're all longer than I wanted them to be, just like this one is now longer than I wanted it to be, but I think you'll find them useful. There's a lot of stuff packed in there, so that would be a great way to prep for the final, and then that's it. Let me make sure I can tell you exactly when the final is, because all of these dates are different. You guys probably know better than I do.
It said on Canvas it's like May 5th at like 1:30 to 3:30.
Yeah. So okay, that is one of the weird things. They want us to start the final when we were supposed to start the final before we all went online. I don't know why. But here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the final available to students starting at 1:30 on May the 5th all the way until 11:59 p.m.
Okay, that's perfect.
But then once you start it, you'll only have the hour to do it, right?
Okay.
And now here's the hard part, and this is going to be really tricky. Like if it's available until 11:59 p.m., let's say somebody starts it at 11:57. Well, what's going to happen is that at 11:59, it's going to cut them off. And then there's no way for me to go into the system and reset their attempt
Yeah.
The computer will think they made an attempt and I can't talk Canvas out of it. And the only option I will have left is to write a whole new final, which I'm not going to do.
Mm.
So the day before the final, I'm going to write an email and explain to everybody as clearly as I possibly can that if you start this right before it cuts off, I can't help you. Like, you're going to get 0 on that exam, because I can't write a brand new exam and I've not been able to figure out how to reset somebody's attempt. It's just like a quiz. Like, if you go in and look around a quiz and then decide, I don't want to do this, you get a 0 and there's no way for me to hit reset on it so that you can try again. It's kind of a flaw in the software, I think. I think they should have a way for instructors to be able to reset a student attempt, but they don't. So there it is. What else? What other questions about the final can I answer?
I think that's all the information we really need about the final.
Okay.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I'm just happy it's extended because I do work that day. So.
Oh, good.
I was saying I have another final that day too, so yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I was a little scared when you said that.
And you asked me You asked me a question about the participation grade.
Yes.
That grade is only for the participation prior to going online. It's the
Okay, perfect.
participation grade. So
Okay.
these sessions that I've been doing have never been mandatory, and there's no penalty assessed for people.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of, because I know that they weren't mandatory, but I didn't know that if I weren't to go to them, would I not get participation grade?
No.
And I know participation grade isn't like something that big, but I am struggling right now, so I was just making sure that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's a good question. No, the participation grade is strictly prior to spring break, and these sessions are not mandatory or voluntary, and there's no grade penalty involved for people that didn't show up exactly at 3:30, because the assumption is that a lot of people are going to watch the videos later, and it just makes it easier to fit this all in. You know, I'm not a believer in forcing synchronous Zoom meetings to pretend like we're in a classroom. And I think most instructors around the country now during this crisis have figured out that that is not the way that online instruction works. I already knew that because I had been through a training on how to do online instruction, because I'm building the online version of this class for next semester before the pandemic even started, which is kind of lucky for us. But yeah, you really can't have like everybody show up at 3:30, because now people have different jobs and they're crammed in there with their family members who are also needing to use the computer. And there's just too many contingencies. You know, when you're all on campus and I can get you all in a room, that's different. But this is a very, obviously, as you know better than me, this is a very different way of doing things. So yeah. All right, guys. Well, if there are no more questions, then I think this is going to be the shortest one of these I've done, 35 minutes. It's a record for me.
I did want to announce I finished my novel last week.
Oh, congratulations. Well done. That is very hard to pull off.
It's a rough draft. It's pretty rough. It's a whole lot of placeholders, and there's a whole scene that I still have to go back through and insert in there, because I couldn't get my mind into whatever it was going to be. But
there's no novelist in the world. So. There's no novelist in the world who doesn't say the same thing about every first draft. It's what they are, right?
I write short stories, and I think I'm on my 5th draft, so I think I know what you mean by that.
Yeah.
So Kia, the secret now is that you got to set it aside for as long as you can stand to set it aside, right?
Yeah. My only problem, because the first one that I finished, it's like 4 years old, and I set it aside, and I have not gone back to it.
Oh, you don't want to wait 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was thinking more like 2 weeks.
Yeah, I procrastinate really bad. That's what my issue is. But
no, if you wait 4 years, the novel in your imagination will move out all of its furniture. It will clean the oven. It will get its security deposit back. And when you go to look for it, it will be gone. So, but set it aside for 2 weeks and then go back to it and see what it looks like, right? Or 3 weeks even is okay. Anything after that, maybe you're getting a little far away from it, but you do want to get some distance from it because you want to get some objectivity, right?
Yeah.
Well, good. Congratulations. That's an awesome summer project for you. That's really cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, guys. Well, don't hesitate to message me. I'm still available to do Zoom meetings if one-on-one. If you want to chat, just shoot me a note and let me know. I'm hoping to have your essays graded within the next what are days? What days are days? Let's see. This is the 30th. Wow. I was about to say I hope to have them finished before the final, but I don't think that's going to be true. So let's say within a week. Let's say by the 7th. Might be more reasonable. Wow, we're out of time. This thing is almost over.
Mm-hmm.
It's really scary. Okay. All right. Well, have a good night. Thank you guys for showing up. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye now.